The rain came sideways that October night, the kind that turns a quiet neighborhood into something unrecognizable. I was on the porch with Max, my German shepherd, watching the storm do what storms do, erase the world in sheets of gray. 23 years on the force had taught me to read weather like a warning. This one felt different. Max shifted beside me, his massive frame alert despite the hour. He was 8 now, same age I'd be if I could keep working. We'd retired together 3 years ago, both of us struggling with the weight of what we'd seen and done. The captain had made the call when my knees gave out during a training exercise. Max had simply aged out of the K9 unit, certified to protect, but no longer needed. We found each other in that shared obsolescence. The house behind us was quiet, too quiet. My wife had left 5 years ago, unable to live with the silence I carried home every shift. No kids, no obligations, just me, Max, and the routine that kept us breathing. That's when Max's ears snapped forward. I'd learned to trust that signal long before we were both retired. His posture changed from comfortable to operational in a single heartbeat. He wasn't barking or growling. That wasn't Max's way. He was listening, tracking something beyond the range of my failing human senses. "What is it?" I whispered, though there was no one to hear us. He moved to the edge of the porch, his wet coat gleaming under the porch light. The rain hammered down, and somewhere in that chaos of water and wind, Max had caught something, a scent, a sound. After 3 years of retirement, every instinct in my body recognized the shift. We weren't just 2 old males killing time anymore. Something had triggered the part of us that had never really left the job. I stepped off the porch into the downpour, my knees protesting immediately. Max moved ahead, not pulling, but with purpose. His handler's intuition, because that's what I'd been, even if my title said retired, told me to follow. The rain soaked through my shirt within seconds, and the cold was the kind that wakes you up to your own mortality. We moved through the neighborhood, past the Hendersons' house, past the empty lot where kids used to play. The storm masked most sounds, but Max navigated it like he could see through the rain itself. His head was up, his body leaning slightly north, toward the ravine that bordered our quiet street. The ravine had been a dumping ground for 30 years. Trash, furniture, the debris of people who didn't care. The city had promised to clean it up twice. It still looked like a wound. Max stopped at the edge. Where the overgrown brush met the slope, his body went rigid. That's when I heard it, not with my ears, but with the part of me that had spent 2 decades listening for trouble. A sound that didn't belong to the storm, something small, something struggling. I moved carefully down the slope, my knees screaming, mud sliding under my boots. Max stayed ahead, his eyes on something I couldn't yet see. The rain was so heavy now that it felt like drowning while standing up. The darkness was almost absolute, broken only by the distant glow of streetlights filtered through the downpour. Then I saw her. She was half buried in debris. A tarp, a broken shelf, scattered wood. At first, I thought it was an animal. But as my eyes adjusted, and Max's body language shifted from alert to protective, I understood. It was a child, a girl, maybe 6 or 7 years old, soaked through and barely moving. My hands moved before my mind caught up. I cleared the debris as gently as I could, my body remembering emergency protocols I'd filed away 3 years ago. She was alive but barely conscious, her lips blue, her small frame shaking with the kind of cold that stops hearts. "I've got you," I heard myself say. "I've got you." Max pressed against her, his large body radiating heat, his instinct perfect and unquestioned. This was what he'd been trained for. This was what I'd been trained for. And for 3 years, we'd been waiting for a reason to use it. I lifted her carefully and climbed back up the slope, my knees threatening to give out with every step. But they didn't. Something older than pain, older than retirement moved through me. Purpose, Duty, the ghost of the officer I'd been, suddenly very much alive. I had no idea who she was or how she'd ended up in that ravine. But as I carried her inside to dry clothes and heat, Max pressed close to her side, I understood something fundamental. Retirement was a lie we told ourselves. Some of us never really leave the job. The job finds you again. Chapter 2. The Questions. Nobody asked. The hospital was sterile and fluorescent, everything that the ravine wasn't. I sat in the waiting area while doctors examined the girl, Max at my feet despite the no pets sign. The nurse at intake had taken one look at his alert posture and decided not to argue. There's a hierarchy to rules, and a German shepherd who just pulled a child from a ravine occupies its own category. Her name was Emma. She was 6 years old. She'd been missing for 14 hours. The detective who found me in the waiting room was young, maybe 30, with the exhausted eyes of someone still believing the job mattered. Her name tag said Reeves. She sat across from me with a notepad that didn't seem to require much writing. "You live 3 blocks from the ravine?" she asked. 2, technically, closer to 3. "And you just happened to go down there during a storm?" I didn't tell her about Max. I didn't explain the signals or the instincts or the way a German shepherd's senses operate on frequencies humans have mostly forgotten. That would lead to other questions, harder ones. Instead, I said Max needed to be outside. The storm was bad, so I went with him. She wrote something down. It wasn't the truth, but it wasn't a lie either. It was the kind of answer that closes conversations instead of opening them. The girl's mother is in recovery. Physically, Emma's going to be fine. Hypothermia, minor lacerations, some dehydration, but nothing permanent. You probably saved her life. I nodded. What else could I do? "Here's what's strange," Reeves said, leaning forward slightly. "Emma won't say how she got down there. She won't say who took her or why. She's traumatized, obviously, but there's something else. She keeps asking for a big dog, says the dog protected her. The doctors think she's confused about what happened." My chest tightened. Max's head remained on his paws, his eyes fixed on Reeves with that uncanny attentiveness German shepherds perfect over decades of breeding. "Kids often fixate on comfort," I said carefully. "The dog was there. Dogs provide safety. Her mind might be attaching meaning to that." "Maybe," Reeves said, but she didn't believe it. I could see it in the way she studied Max, in the way her hand moved unconsciously toward her badge, like it might anchor her to logic. "The thing is, there's no evidence Emma wandered down there. No torn clothing consistent with a fall. No signs of her trying to climb out. The debris that surrounded her, it was deliberate, like someone placed her there." The weight of that statement settled between us. "Someone put her in the ravine," I said flatly, "or someone left her there after something else. We're still working the scene, but yeah, this wasn't an accident." Reeves closed her notepad. "I'll need a formal statement from you. And if Max here could talk, I'd take that too. But between you and me, retired cop, I think you know there's more to this story than a child getting lost in a storm." She was right. I could feel it the way I'd felt the shift in Max's body on the porch. The way instinct operates when pattern recognition exceeds conscious thought. Emma hadn't wandered into that ravine. She'd been placed there like evidence, like a message. The question was, to whom? "Is she safe?" I asked. Reeves hesitated. That hesitation was its own answer. "Her mother works nights at a distribution center. Emma's been in after-school care since 3 p.m. She was picked up from there by someone. The staff thought it was her older cousin. The cousin doesn't exist. The car was borrowed. We're tracking that now." "So she was taken deliberately?" "Yes, and then left in a place where she'd likely be found." "Probably, unless whoever did this made a mistake." I didn't believe in mistakes like that. Neither did Max. His body remained perfectly still, but I felt the shift in his attention, his focus narrowing like a hunter's. "I want to help," I said. Reeves studied me for a long moment. "You're retired." "I am. Retired cops have a way of getting in the way of active investigations." "They also know how to not leave traces," I replied. "How to move quietly through systems, how to ask questions that don't sound like official ones." She stood up, tucking her notepad away. "Give your statement to the officer outside, and keep your dog close. If someone's taking children and leaving them as messages, the game is still being played. We just don't know the rules yet." After she left, I sat with Max in the fluorescent silence. The girl had been placed in the ravine, that much was certain. And something about her placement, about the deliberation of it, felt personal, not random, not a mistake. I'd spent 23 years learning to read violence. Retirement hadn't erased that literacy. Max lifted his head and looked at me, and I understood without words what he was asking. "Are we back?" For the first time in 3 years, I knew the answer. "Yeah," I whispered. "We're back." If you're following this rescue so far, tell us in the comments where in the world you're watching from. Chapter 3. The Shape of the Pattern. Her mother's name was Sarah Chen. She worked 12-hour nights at the distribution center, earned $16, $50 an hour, and hadn't slept since Emma disappeared. I watched her through the hospital's observation window as she sat beside her daughter's bed, one hand gripping Emma's small fingers like they might slip away if she relaxed. I'd been a cop long enough to recognize the particular geometry of maternal fear. It reshapes the entire body. It hollows out the chest and fills it with something heavier than grief, an anticipatory loss that hasn't happened yet, but feels inevitable. Reeves had given me the file, not officially, but there's a language between people who've carried badges, and she'd made sure I knew where the precinct's break room recycling was and what happened to files left on its table. Emma had been taken from Riverside after-school care at 4:47 p.m. The person who picked her up had ID, a forged visitor pass, and claimed to be Cousin Miguel. Staff described him as Hispanic, late 20s, professional demeanor. He'd signed the log with handwriting that was deliberately nondescript, the kind of writing someone practices to be forgettable. Max and I had spent the afternoon tracking the borrowed car, a 2019 Honda Civic, registered to a man named Derek Paulson in the neighboring county. Paulson reported it stolen Thursday morning, filed a report, and provided insurance documentation. Everything clean, everything rehearsed. I didn't approach Paulson. Reeves had warned me that much. But I drove past his house. A modest ranch on a quiet street, well-maintained, the kind of place where nothing remarkable ever happens. The kind of place where you could prepare something terrible without anyone noticing. Max had been agitated the entire time we were near it. Now, sitting in the hospital cafeteria with cold coffee I wasn't drinking, I spread the pieces out mentally. Emma taken by someone impersonating a family member. Emma placed deliberately in a ravine where a retired cop and his German shepherd just happened to find her. Emma recovered, but traumatized, and refusing to speak about her ordeal. And the detail that kept circling back, Emma kept asking for a big dog. "You're thinking too loud," a voice said behind me. I didn't turn. Detective Reeves sat across from me, looking more exhausted than she had this morning. "You've got that look people get when the pattern is starting to show itself." "What do you know about Derek Paulson?" I asked. Her jaw tightened. "How do you know that name?" "Public record. Car theft report. I'm not breaking any laws." "You're breaking several laws by doing exactly what I asked you not to do." But she didn't leave. She ordered black coffee and sat with it, not drinking. "Paulson's clean, no priors, steady job as an electrician, lives alone, no contact with Child Protective Services. The car was actually stolen. We verified it with the rental company he rents from sometimes. Someone took his car to abduct a child. Someone with access to his keys and knowledge of his schedule. Reeves corrected, which opens a new category of problems. Either Paulson's involved and lying, or someone he knows very well is, or someone he works with. She looked at me then, and I saw something shift in her expression. Recognition, maybe, or the beginning of a theory that required more evidence than she was willing to acknowledge at a police station. "There's more," she said quietly. "Emma's description of what happened, the parts she's willing to talk about, keeps circling back to a room, not the ravine, before that. A room where she was kept." My hands went still on the table. "She says she was in a room, and there were pictures on the wall, pictures of other children. She's terrified, but she keeps describing the pictures. We're working on getting her to identify specific details, but trauma response in 6-year-olds is complex. Suggestibility is high. We can't push too hard without contaminating testimony. But you believe her." "I believe she was in a room with pictures of children," Reeves said, "and I believe someone went to significant trouble to take her, keep her briefly, and then return her. That's not standard abduction behavior. That's someone making a point." "A point to whom? That's the question, isn't it?" Max appeared beside us then, though I hadn't signaled him. He'd been resting in the corner, but his body language shifted, alert, focused. His nose lifted slightly, catching something in the hospital's recycled air. Reeves noticed. "Your dog does that a lot." "He's picking up on my stress," I said, though we both knew it was more complicated than that. Max was picking up on the shape of danger in the conversation itself, the knowledge that somewhere in this city there was a room with pictures of children, and that room was still occupied. "I need to go back to the precinct," Reeves said, standing, "and you need to go home. But if your dog picks up on anything, any pattern, any location that feels wrong, you'll let me know quietly." "I will." "And you won't do anything that requires a lawyer." "I can't promise that," I said. She nodded, like she'd expected exactly that answer. Before she left, she paused. "Emma asked for her dog multiple times today. Not a dog, her dog, like Max is the one who protected her, like she recognized something in him. Kids imagine things. Maybe, or maybe your dog found her because he was meant to." After she left, I sat alone with Max and the weight of what Reeves had described. A room with pictures, multiple children, the deliberate placement of Emma in the ravine like a calling card, like a message being sent to someone specific. Max put his head on the table beside my coffee cup, a gesture of solidarity I'd learned to read over 8 years together. In his body language was a simple truth. We'd found one child, but there were more. And the person who'd orchestrated this had made sure we'd eventually understand that. The hunting had begun again. Chapter 4. The breach. Finding the room took 17 days. Reeves had official channels, warrants, surveillance teams, database cross-references. I had Max and the particular advantage of not needing legal justification for where we walked. We moved through the city's quiet spaces, industrial zones, abandoned properties, the forgotten architectures where missing people became possible. Max worked with the precision of someone who'd spent 8 years trained to locate human scent beneath concrete and time. But there was something else in his behavior now, something that went beyond training. He moved like he was tracking not just a smell, but a purpose, like he understood what we were looking for and why it mattered. The building was in the old manufacturing district 3 miles from the hospital. It had been a textile factory once, then a storage facility, then nothing. Empty for almost a decade and waiting to be demolished. The kind of place that attracted no attention because it demanded none. Just another wound in a neighborhood already scarred. We found it on a Tuesday evening when the light was failing and the industrial zone became a landscape of shadows. Max's behavior shifted as we approached. No excitement, no aggressive posturing, just a steady, methodical focus. His nose stayed low, following ground scent toward the building's eastern entrance. The lock had been picked recently. Scratches on the mechanism suggested someone with basic skills, but no particular subtlety. Inside, the air was different. I could smell it immediately, the chemical wrongness of industrial cleaning products applied heavily and recently, the kind of smell that tries to erase traces. We moved through the ground floor first. Nothing. Machinery remains, scattered refuse, the detritus of abandonment. But on the second floor, Max's behavior changed again. He climbed the stairs with purpose, his ears forward, his entire body communicating certainty. The room was toward the back. The door was reinforced from the outside with new locks. Industrial-grade hardware installed in the last few months based on the condition of the scratches. Someone had taken significant trouble to make sure this space could be sealed from the inside without external observation. I didn't try the locks. Instead, I moved around the perimeter looking for an alternative. Max found it. A window that had been boarded but imperfectly sealed, the nails old enough to be original to the building's abandonment. I worked it open carefully, mindful of disturbing evidence, and climbed through. The room was smaller than I expected, maybe 15 by 20 feet, and it was exactly as Emma had described it. The pictures were everywhere, Polaroids, printed photographs, children's faces, ages ranging from 4 to 10, arranged on the walls in neat rows. Some faces repeated across multiple images. Some appeared only once. The photographs were organized by some internal logic I couldn't immediately decipher, but the organization itself was meticulous, obsessive. I counted 47 distinct children. Beneath each photograph, someone had written information in precise handwriting, names, ages, dates. The level of documentation was clinical, the kind of record-keeping that belongs in a database or a file, not a photograph-lined room in an abandoned factory. My hands moved carefully as I photographed everything with my phone, my cop's instinct overriding the chaos in my chest. Evidence. Chain of custody. Even if I couldn't use it officially. Even if everything I was doing was a violation of protocols I'd lived by for 23 years. Max moved through the room without touching anything, his body communicating something I couldn't quite translate. Not distress, not aggression, something closer to recognition, like he understood exactly what this space was and what it represented. In the corner, hidden behind a stack of outdated equipment, I found the logbook. It was leather-bound, expensive, filled with meticulous handwriting, dates, observations, notes on each child's behavior, compliance, reactions. The entries went back 5 years, and as I read them, the full scope of what I was looking at became clear. This wasn't random. This wasn't amateur. This was someone who'd been systematically taking children, documenting them, and then returning them. Someone conducting research or building a collection or satisfying a specific psychological need. I couldn't yet determine which. The most recent entries were about Emma, detailed observations of her fear response, her resilience, her attachment patterns, clinical, disturbing, and, most importantly, recent. The last entry was dated just 3 days after we'd found her in the ravine. Whoever had written this was still active, still watching. I photographed the logbook, every page, my hands steady despite the ice forming in my chest. Max stayed close, his presence anchoring me to the present moment and the necessity of not panicking. We left the room exactly as we'd found it, exited through the window and walked back through the industrial zone toward the street. I didn't run. I didn't hurry. But every sense I had was screaming that we'd just broken open a door that shouldn't have been opened, that somewhere in this city, someone had just realized we knew. I called Reeves from the car. "You found something," she said. "Not a question. A room, pictures of children." Documentation going back 5 years. I've photographed everything. The logbook is current. The last entry is from 3 days ago. Silence on the other end. Then, where are you? Driving away from a textile factory in the manufacturing district. I can send you coordinates. Don't go anywhere near it again. Don't tell anyone else. I'm calling the FBI. Reeves, this is beyond us now. This is beyond me. A systematic collection of 40-plus children, documented surveillance, recent activity. This isn't a local case. This is federal. She hung up. Max and I drove through the city's nighttime streets, my hands gripping the wheel tighter than necessary, my mind already constructing the geometry of what we'd found. Someone had been taking children, keeping them briefly, photographing them, documenting them, and returning them. Not all of them. Some of those faces in the photographs probably never came home. The question that carved through everything else was simple and terrifying. Why had Emma been returned? Was it because we found her? Or had she always been meant to be found? Chapter 5. The Fracture. The FBI arrived within 36 hours. Special Agent Morrison was a woman in her 50s with the particular weariness of someone who dedicated her career to understanding the patterns humans create when given opportunity and darkness. She sat across from me in the precinct's interview room with Reeves present and a recording device between us. "You contaminated a crime scene," she said. Not angry, just factual. "I found a crime scene before it was officially classified as such, by breaking into a secured building. I didn't break anything. I opened a window that was already compromised." She smiled slightly. "You're still a cop, detective. Once a cop, always a cop. That's the problem, isn't it? You couldn't let this go. You couldn't let someone else handle it." She was right, but admitting it would only make my position worse. "The photographs in that room represent 47 documented cases," Morrison continued. "We've cross-referenced them with missing persons databases, child trafficking networks, and historical abduction cases. 28 of those children have never been found. 19 have turned up alive within days or weeks of their disappearance. The one thing they have in common is trauma responses consistent with capture and rapid release." "Release," I repeated. "You mean the person returned them?" "In most cases, yes. But we believe that's part of the pattern. The abductor isn't interested in keeping them. He's interested in the capture itself, the documentation, the assertion of control, and then the demonstration of mercy. It's a psychological signature." "And Emma?" "Emma was supposed to be found by someone specific, you. The deliberate placement in the ravine, the timing during the storm, the way the debris was arranged, all of it was designed to ensure her discovery. By you. By your dog." I felt Max shift against my leg, his body responding to the tension in my voice. "Why?" I asked. "That's what we're trying to determine. The pattern shifts once you enter the scenario. Emma is documented in his most detailed entries. She matters to him in a way the other children don't. And he went to significant trouble to ensure you would find her." Morrison pulled out a photograph. It was grainy, taken from a traffic camera 2 weeks before Emma disappeared. It showed a man in a baseball cap and nondescript clothing walking past a school playground. In the background, barely visible, was Emma, playing on the monkey bars, completely unaware she was being observed. "He wasn't random in his selection," Morrison said. "Emma was targeted, which means you were targeted. The question is whether he knew about you before selecting Emma, or whether he selected Emma specifically to draw your attention." The distinction felt critical, but also impossible to answer. "There's something else," Morrison said, and the shift in her tone was slight but unmistakable. "We found forensic evidence in that room. Hair, skin cells, textile fibers. We're running them through all available databases. But there's one marker that came up immediately in the initial screening, a genetic profile that matches a person of interest in a cold case from 2018. She slid another photograph across the table. It was a mugshot, a man in his 30s, thin-featured, with the particular hollowness of someone operating on the edge of what the human body could sustain. "Marcus Webb," Morrison said. "He was arrested 8 years ago on suspicion of child endangerment after a tip-off from an anonymous source. The case fell apart when the witness recanted their statement. Webb was released on insufficient evidence. He's been clean in the system ever since. No arrests, no violations, but his DNA profile from his 2017 booking just matched evidence we found in that room. So he's your suspect. He's our primary person of interest, but here's what's bothering me. Webb disappeared from his last known address 6 months ago. No forwarding address, no employment records, nothing. It's like he fell off the map." I understood what she was implying without her saying it directly. Until Emma, Morrison confirmed. The room's activity suggests he's been present and active, at least until 3 days ago. After that, nothing. We're running surveillance on known addresses, places he frequented before his 2017 arrest, individuals he had contact with. But if he's aware that we know about the room, he'll move. He'll disappear again, and the documentation will stop. "And the children," Reeves said quietly. "The ones still on his list." The weight of that truth settled over the conversation. Webb had been systematically taking children for years. Whether Emma was part of that system or a deviation from it remained unclear. But the fact that he'd deliberately drawn me into the case suggested a fracture in his pattern, a moment where his psychology had shifted towards something that required external validation or witness. "I need you to stay available," Morrison said to me, "and I need your dog available. If Webb is looking for contact, if he's trying to establish a communication pattern with you, I want to know about it immediately." "You think he'll contact me directly?" "I think he already did, by returning Emma, by ensuring you found her, by orchestrating every element of that night to bring the two of you together. This is his opening gambit. We need to understand why." After Morrison left, Reeves and I sat in the precinct's break room with coffee. Neither of us would drink. The FBI had taken my photographs, my phone, my access to the case. I was officially benched. Officially not a cop, not an investigator, just a retired officer with an emotional dog and knowledge of things I should have left untouched. "He wanted you," Reeves said finally. "I know. Not just as a discovery mechanism, but specifically, you, your dog. Some part of his psychological profile required that specific pairing." "Then what?" I asked. "And what does he do now?" "Now," Reeves said, "he reaches out. Because if I know anything about the pattern we're looking at, it's this. He doesn't do anything by accident. Emma wasn't found by accident. You weren't found by accident. Whatever comes next has already been planned." That night, Max and I returned to our quiet house. The storm had passed weeks ago, but the air still carried its particular weight. I sat on the porch as darkness fell, my hand on Max's solid frame, feeling the rise and fall of his breathing. Somewhere in the city, a man named Marcus Webb was watching. He'd planned for Emma to reach me. He'd orchestrated my discovery of the room. And he'd left his last entry just 3 days after Emma's return, after he knew we were looking for him. The fracture in his pattern was widening, and I understood with absolute certainty that Max and I were no longer passive observers in whatever he had planned. We were the mechanism through which he intended to achieve something. We just didn't know what it was yet. Chapter 6. The Message. The package arrived on a Saturday morning, addressed to me with no return address and postmarked from the city's central post office. I didn't open it immediately. I called Reeves first and she called Morrison, and within an hour my kitchen was a federal evidence staging area. Inside the package was a leather journal, expensive, the same quality as the one we'd found in the room, and a single photograph. The photograph showed a child I didn't recognize, a boy, maybe 7 years old, sitting in what looked like a basement room, not frightened, not struggling, just looking directly at the camera with an expression that suggested he understood exactly why he was being photographed. Morrison opened the journal with gloved hands, her face remaining carefully neutral as she read. But I saw the moment her breathing changed, the moment she understood what she was looking at. "He wants to confess," she said quietly. The journal contained detailed entries about each child, not just observations, but narratives, careful reconstructions of each abduction, each interaction, each moment of fear or compliance or resilience. It was autobiography written through their eyes, a way of inhabiting their terror and coming away feeling understood, but more than that, it was an invitation. The final entry, dated the day before the package was sent, read, "I've documented 30 years of study, 47 vessels for understanding what fear teaches us. You have found my work, you have found my method. Now you must find me, and in finding me, you will understand what I am trying to preserve. The girl was meant to reach you. You were meant to find the room, and now, through these words, you are meant to understand the purpose. Come to the reservoir on the north edge of the city, tomorrow at dusk. Come alone with your dog. Come ready to learn what you've been missing all these years." "It's a trap," Reeves said immediately. "Of course it's a trap," Morrison replied, "but it's also an opportunity. He wants to meet. He's ready to end the pattern or escalate it. Either way, we'll have him." "He said come alone," I noted. "He doesn't know about the technology we can deploy," Morrison said. "We'll have snipers positioned, surveillance drones, plainclothes agents within 50 meters. He won't see us, but we'll see him. And we'll have him." I understood the mathematics of what Morrison was proposing. I'd spent 23 years on the police force. I knew how these operations worked, the theories that guided them, the confidence that came from preparation and firepower. But I also knew something deeper. Webb had written this invitation specifically to me. He'd orchestrated events specifically to bring me to this point, and there was something about his psychological signature that suggested preparation, that suggested he'd already accounted for the tactical response. "What time?" I asked. "Sunset. 6:47 p.m. tomorrow." "And if I don't go?" "We go anyway," Morrison said. "We pick him up. We interrogate him. We eventually get a conviction based on evidence and testimony. And the children he's documented but not found, the silence was answer enough. Some of those 47 children had been returned. Some were still missing. Some were probably never coming back. And if Webb decided not to cooperate, if he decided to take that knowledge to whatever dark corner his psychology inhabited, those families would never know what happened to their children. Max pressed against my leg, his weight solid and present. I looked at him and understood what he'd been trained to understand. Sometimes the trap is the only way through. "I'll go," I said. The next day crawled past. Morrison had me fitted with a microphone concealed in my jacket, a GPS tracker in my phone, and explicit instructions about what to say, how to position myself, where to keep Max. The apparatus of official surveillance, all designed to ensure that when Webb arrived, I wasn't actually alone. But as sunset approached, and I drove toward the reservoir with Max beside me, I kept thinking about Webb's final instruction. Come ready to learn what you've been missing all these years. Not come to stop him, come to understand him. The reservoir was a man-made body of water on the city's northern edge, fed by diverted rivers and used for industrial purposes. It was quiet at dusk, almost empty of people. The water was still, reflecting the orange light of the setting sun. I parked at the far end and waited. Max's behavior shifted gradually as darkness fell. He began to track something, a scent carried on the wind from the water's far side. His ears rotated toward a distant sound I couldn't quite hear, and when Webb finally emerged from the darkness, I understood that Max had known he was coming long before I would have seen him. Marcus Webb looked exactly like his photograph, and nothing like what I'd expected. He was smaller somehow, more fragile, moving with the particular stiffness of someone carrying invisible weight. He wore casual clothes, jeans and a weathered jacket, and carried nothing. His hands were visible and empty. "Detective," he said, his voice softer than I expected. "Thank you for coming." "I'm not a detective anymore," I replied. "No," Webb agreed. "But you are. Once a detective, always a detective. That's what your dog understands. That's why you were perfect for this." I didn't respond immediately. Max remained at my side, alert but not aggressive. The tactical team would be watching, waiting for a signal or a problem. Morrison had been clear. At the first sign of violence or immediate threat, they would engage. "The children," Webb said, moving slowly closer. "You're wondering why I documented them, why I took them and returned them, why I orchestrated this meeting. I know why," I said. "You wanted to be understood." "No," Webb corrected gently. "I wanted to understand. Every child I encountered was a mirror. I looked into their fear and recognized something true about myself, about what fear teaches us when we're brave enough to face it directly." "You're a predator," I said. "I'm a scientist," Webb replied. "And you're a man who gave his life to protecting people. You know what I know, that the world is built on the foundation of fear, that everything we do is structured around avoiding it or controlling it. I simply decided to study it directly." Max growled then, a low, purely physical response to the shift in Webb's posture and the particular predatory focus that had crept into his eyes. "Your dog understands," Webb said. "He understands that we're the same, predators, both of us." "We're nothing alike," I said. "Aren't we?" Webb stepped closer. "You've killed in the line of duty. You've been trained to identify threats and eliminate them. You've looked into the eyes of frightened people and made decisions about their lives. How different is that from what I've done? If this story has you hooked hit-like, it helps us bring more true rescues to light. The difference," I said, "is that I protected children. You preyed on them." Webb smiled. "And yet here we are, the hunter and the hunted, meeting at dusk. Your police team is positioned around us, watching through scopes and screens. Your dog is ready to defend you, and I'm standing here unarmed, finally allowing myself to be caught. Who is the predator now?" That's when I understood what he'd orchestrated. Not a trap for himself, a trap for me. A trap designed to force me into a moment where I had to choose between the lethal authority I'd surrendered and the restraint that retirement had demanded. My hand moved toward the service weapon I'd insisted on carrying, despite Morrison's protests, and Webb's eyes lit up with something like joy. "Yes," he whispered. "Now you understand." Max moved in that instant, not toward Webb, but toward me, his body interpositioning between my hand and the gun. He'd been trained to prevent officer escalation, to recognize the particular moment when a cop crossed the line from protector to executor, and he was executing that training perfectly. The gunshot came from nowhere and everywhere, Morrison's sniper responding to what looked like an imminent threat. Webb went down, his body folding like cloth. I heard the tactical team converging, their radios crackling with protocols and procedures. I heard Reeves shouting my name, asking if I was secure. But all I could feel was Max's weight against my leg and the profound understanding that Webb had won. He'd orchestrated his entire story to reach this moment, to force me to choose, to demonstrate that I was exactly what he'd said. A predator wearing a badge. And in that demonstration, he'd transformed his ending from suicide by cop into martyrdom. Chapter 7. The Reckoning. Webb survived the shooting which nobody anticipated. The sniper's aim had been perfect. Center mass, clean entry, but the round had missed his heart by less than an inch. He was in intensive care, under federal guard, conscious but unwilling to speak. Morrison was furious about the failure of her intended resolution. I was caught in the particular limbo that exists between guilt and vindication. Max had saved my life that night, or saved my career, or saved my soul. I wasn't certain which. The internal investigation cleared me of any wrongdoing, and Morrison's report noted my dog's intervention as a positive sign of restraint under pressure. But neither of those facts could erase what I'd understood in that moment. I'd been ready to cross a line that, once crossed, could never be uncrossed. Reeves visited me at home 3 days after the reservoir. Max greeted her with his usual quiet dignity, while I made coffee I knew we wouldn't drink. "Webb's talking now," she said without preamble. "He's asking for you specifically." "No," I replied. "You don't know what he's going to say." "I don't need to. Whatever he tells me is designed to manipulate or control or claim some kind of psychological kinship. I'm done with this." Reeves was quiet for a moment. "He's given up the location of 6 children we haven't found yet. All alive, all documented, all recoverable, because he's chosen to tell us where they are. He says he'll only provide the complete list if he speaks with you." That detail changed the mathematics entirely. 6 children, 6 families who could have their children returned, 6 people who could stop waiting. If I go, what does he want from me? "Understanding," he says. "Acknowledgement. He wants to know that you see him the way he sees himself, not as a monster, but as someone pursuing truth through unconventional methodology." I won't give him that. Then the children stay missing. That's the bargain. I called Morrison and made clear my conditions. I would speak with Webb, but only in the presence of both Morrison and Reeves. No isolation, no opportunity for psychological manipulation. And at the first sign that the conversation was designed to generate media or glorify his crimes, I was done. She agreed. The meeting took place in the hospital's secure conference room. Webb was pale and weak, his chest wrapped in bandages that showed through his hospital gown. But his eyes were the same, that particular intensity that suggested he was seeing through me rather than at me. "You came," he said, smiling slightly. "I came for the children," I replied. "Not for you. And yet you're here, in the same room, breathing the same air. That proximity matters. It means something. It means nothing. You're a predator. I'm someone whose job was to stop predators. That relationship ended the moment you were arrested." "Did it?" Webb leaned forward, his movement careful and pained. "Or did it evolve? You understand now, don't you? What I tried to show you through Emma, through the room, through bringing you to the reservoir." I remained silent. "You understand that fear is the fundamental truth of human experience. That everything beautiful we create is built on top of terror. That the only way to truly understand ourselves is to confront that darkness directly. The difference between us," I said slowly, "is that I spent my career protecting people from that confrontation. You spent yours forcing people into it. That's not a philosophical distinction, that's a criminal one." "Criminal," Webb repeated, as if tasting the word. "Yes, I suppose I am. But you're something else, aren't you? Something more complicated. You're a man who has killed for his duty, who has taken lives in the name of order and safety, and now you're sitting across from me, judging my choices while remaining protected by the very system that absolves you of your own violence." Morrison shifted slightly, but I raised my hand to stop her. "Tell me where the children are," I said flatly. Webb smiled wider. 5 of them are in the warehouses district in a storage unit registered under an alias. 3 are in a residential property in the suburbs, cared for but confined. 2 are locations, I interrupted. Just the locations. He provided them. Addresses, unit numbers, identifying details. And as he spoke, I understood that this was what he'd wanted all along. Not confession, but validation. He'd wanted to demonstrate that he had such control over his own crimes that he could choose which information to reveal and to whom, that he could orchestrate even his own arrest and imprisonment. As we were leaving, Webb called out, "Your dog saved you at the reservoir. Did you understand why?" I didn't answer. He recognized what you didn't want to admit, that you and I are conducting the same search. We're just using different methods to find the answer to the same question. What is humanity when the masks come off? The 6 children were found within hours, all alive, all traumatized, but not irreparably harmed. The media called me a hero, and the department offered to restore my career. I declined both. Instead, Max and I spent the evening on the porch, watching the darkness settle over the neighborhood. I understood now what Morrison had been trying to tell me weeks ago. Sometimes the people we hunt are not external monsters, but internal mirrors. Webb had forced me to confront what lay beneath my careful retirement, my deliberate distance from violence, and he'd done it precisely because he understood what I was running from. Chapter 8. The Silence. After 3 months passed, Webb was convicted on 31 counts of kidnapping, child endangerment, and related charges. He received life imprisonment without parole, plus an additional 52 years that existed only as administrative redundancy. In sentencing, the judge noted the unprecedented cooperation that had led to the recovery of the missing children. Webb smiled throughout the proceedings, seemingly unconcerned with the outcome. The media lost interest quickly. A predator caught, prosecuted, imprisoned, the narrative had a satisfying arc. The fact that he'd orchestrated the entire discovery complicated the story, so most outlets simplified it. A dog had found a child, a retired cop had investigated, a killer was caught. End of story. Except it wasn't. Because the fundamental question that Webb had posed about the nature of predation, about the way authority and violence could coexist, remained unanswered, and I carried it with me like a stone. Max had aged noticeably since the reservoir incident. He was 9 now, which meant we were entering the late chapters of his life. I'd noticed the grey around his muzzle deepening, his movement slightly stiffer on cold mornings. We still took our walks, still maintained our routine, but something had shifted. He carried a knowledge now that made him seem older than his years. The knowledge that violence existed not just in his training protocols, but in the moral architecture of the world itself. Reeves visited occasionally, updating me on cases I was no longer part of. Sarah Chen, Emma's mother, had moved to another state and was working toward a degree in social services. Emma was in therapy, showing the resilience children sometimes possessed, forgetting the specific details of her trauma while carrying its weight into her future. "She asks about your dog," Reeves mentioned during one visit. "Emma does? She still thinks Max protected her. The therapist says it's healthy. The dog becomes a symbol of safety rather than a reminder of danger." I nodded but didn't respond. The truth was more complicated than symbols. Max had been present when Emma was recovered, and his presence had become inseparable from her narrative about that event. Whether that presence had actually changed the outcome was a question I'd stopped asking. The question that had replaced it was more fundamental. What had Emma's abduction been designed to accomplish? Webb claimed, in letters that Morrison occasionally shared with me, that he'd returned Emma specifically to attract my attention, that he'd orchestrated the entire sequence to prove that he understood me. But I'd come to suspect a different motivation. I'd come to suspect that Emma's return wasn't about me at all. It was about establishing a pattern that law enforcement would recognize and pursue. A way of confessing without confession. A way of achieving a kind of immortality through documentation. He'd known he'd be caught. He'd known he'd be imprisoned. But he'd also known that his crime, his psychology, his particular brand of violence would be studied and discussed and researched for years to come. He'd ensured that through the precision and documentation of his work, in creating victims, he'd created a record of himself that would outlast any life imprisonment. One evening in late spring, I received a letter from Webb himself. It had been screened by federal authorities and deemed non-threatening, which meant only that it contained no direct calls to violence or escape plans. The psychological manipulation contained within it had apparently been deemed acceptable. Detective, I am told you have refused all interview requests and declined to participate in the academic studies of my case. I find that disappointing but understandable. You're attempting to create distance from what you've learned about yourself through our intersection. You're trying to return to the world of defined roles and clear boundaries. I respect that attempt, even if I believe it to be futile. The truth I tried to show you through Emma, through the room, through the reservoir, that truth remains available to you whenever you're ready to accept it. That truth is this: predation and protection are not opposing forces. They are different expressions of the same fundamental drive to dominate and control one's environment. I preyed on children to understand fear. You protected your community through the threat of violence. Different methods, same purpose, same hunger. Your dog knows this. Watch him closely and you'll see the predator beneath the training. You'll see what he's become through his years of learning to track and capture and restrain. By the time you read this, I will have stopped writing. I will have stopped looking at the world through violence. But the world will continue to look at violence through me, and in that gaze I have achieved something that law enforcement and imprisonment cannot take away. Immortality through the permanent record of my crimes. I do not regret what I have done. I only regret that I was not allowed to complete my research. Miss Webb. I burned the letter in the fireplace while Max watched. The words it contained were designed to wound, to create doubt, to suggest that my identity was fundamentally compromised. And they worked because they contained enough truth to be dangerous. I had been a predator in my own way. I had used violence as a tool of my authority. I had made decisions about other people's lives in moments where I held a gun and they didn't. The question wasn't whether Webb was right. The question was whether that rightness changed anything about the necessary work of protection. Whether understanding the dark roots of authority meant I had to renounce authority itself. Max pressed his head against my leg as the letter burned, and in that gesture was something like absolution, or perhaps just acceptance, the recognition that some truths could be understood without being accepted, that some knowledge could be carried without determining the entire shape of one's life. Chapter 9. The Bridge. The last walk we took together was different from the thousands that preceded it. Max moved slower now, his gait stiffer, his enthusiasm for exploration diminished by the simple arithmetic of age and exhaustion. It was early autumn, the temperature perfect, the light amber and precise. The neighborhood had changed since we'd retired together 3 years ago. New families, different faces, a constant churn of people becoming and then leaving and then being replaced. Neither of us noticed much of it. Instead, we walked toward the ravine where we'd found Emma, drawn by something neither training nor instinct quite explained. It was simply where we needed to be. The ravine looked smaller than I remembered. The debris had been cleared, the space partially remediated. It was becoming just another piece of the city's landscape, the place where a child had been found, gradually transforming into the place where that memory would eventually be forgotten. Max stood at the edge for a long time, his chest rising and falling with the effort of merely existing. I wondered if he was remembering the rain, the urgency, the particular purpose that had animated him in those hours, or if time had already transformed the specific into the general, not a memory of that night, but a knowledge of what that night meant. "We did something," I said quietly. "We found a child. We stopped someone who was hurting people. That matters." Max didn't respond because he couldn't, but he pressed against my leg, and that contact contained something like agreement. The walk back was slow, deliberate, marked by frequent pauses where Max simply stood and breathed. By the time we reached our house, the sun was setting, and my knees were aching with a bone-deep fatigue I hadn't experienced in years. That night, I called Morrison. "I'm ready to do the interview," I said. "About the web case. About everything." "Are you sure?" she asked. "No," I replied, "but I need to put it into words. I need to try to explain what happened in a way that acknowledges both the facts and the complications beneath them." The interview took place over 2 days in a federal building downtown. Morrison had me walk through everything, from the night we found Emma to the reservoir to Webb's letters. I talked about my fears, my doubts, the moments where I'd wanted to cross lines I couldn't uncross. I talked about Max's intervention and what it meant, and the different interpretations of that intervention that were possible. "Do you believe Webb was right?" Morrison asked at one point. "That you and he were conducting the same search?" "I believe," I said carefully, "that he was partially right. I believe that authority and violence are more entangled than we generally admit, and I believe that understanding that entanglement is necessary to being ethical about exercising authority. But I don't believe that entanglement means we're equivalent. I was a cop who used violence as a tool in service of protection. He was a predator who used violence as a tool in service of domination. The context changes everything." "And your dog?" Morrison leaned forward. "What do you believe about him?" I thought about Max, his aging frame, his unchanging loyalty, the particular wisdom that seemed to deepen as his body weakened. "I believe he understands something I'm still learning," I said. "I believe he knows that the line between protector and predator is thinner than we want to admit, and that the only thing that keeps you on the right side of that line is constant vigilance about your own darkness. He forced me to confront that darkness at the reservoir, and I think that confrontation, as painful as it was necessary." Max died the following spring, on an afternoon so perfect it seemed designed to mock the gravity of its occurrence. He went peacefully, his body finally surrendering to the accumulation of years. I was with him, my hand on his chest, feeling his heartbeat slow and then stop. And in that transition from animate to still, I understood that part of my own life had ended as well. Not the part that had been a cop, not the part that carried authority and its complications, but the part that had been defined by the search for answers, by the pursuit of understanding through an external agent. Max had been my mirror, the lens through which I could see myself. Without him, I would have to develop that sight internally. The memorial service was small, just Reeves, a few others from the department, and Morrison, who developed a grudging respect for the strange case that had defined the end of my career. We didn't talk much about Max specifically. Instead, we talked about the work, about the children who'd been found, about the resolution that had come through catastrophe. "He was a good dog," Reeves said simply, "one of the best." "He was more than that," I replied. "He was a mirror. He showed me things I didn't want to see." "That's what the best of them do," Morrison agreed. I scattered Max's ashes at the ravine where we'd found Emma. The place had changed in the intervening months. It was becoming a planned memorial site for victims of violent crime. There was talk of a garden, of plaques naming those who hadn't made it home. Max's ashes joined that space between remembrance and forgetting, between the specific and the permanent, And I understood finally what Webb had been trying to accomplish through his crimes. Not just to study fear in others, but to create something that would remain after he was gone, a record that proved he had existed, that he had mattered, that his particular brand of understanding had been significant enough to deserve documentation. The Predator's ultimate goal wasn't survival, it was immortality through the permanent witness of their crimes. I chose a different path. I let Max's memory become my immortality, not through documentation or narrative, but through quiet, unwitnessed living. I volunteered with at-risk youth, not as a cop, but as a person who understood the cost of violence. I worked with search and rescue, training new dogs, teaching them to find lost children and lost adults. Not to erase what I'd learned, but to channel it into work that wasn't predatory. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the light was right and the city was still, I stood at that ravine and remembered a night when a dog's instincts had changed everything, when a predator had tried to teach me I was like him, and a protector had shown me I could choose to be something else entirely. The journey between those two moments was the real work, the real reckoning, the real redemption. Loyalty is not about choosing the stronger predator. It's about choosing to be strong in service of something beyond yourself.